Silence is one of the most powerful emotional triggers in human interaction, especially in relationships between men and women. When a man who once gave attention, affection, or communication suddenly becomes quiet, it creates an invisible tension that women feel deeply. This isn't about punishment or manipulation, it's about emotional gravity. Women are naturally sensitive to changes in energy and attention, and silence from a man they once connected with forces them into reflection. It stirs questions, uncertainty, and a sense of loss that words could never achieve. Most men underestimate how impactful silence can be. In a world where everyone seeks instant responses, validation, and clarity, silence stands out as rare and unsettling. When a woman senses that your focus is no longer centered on her, that your life continues confidently without her attention, it triggers a deep psychological shift. She begins to wonder what changed, why you pulled back, and whether she misjudged your value. That curiosity quickly turns into longing because silence gives her space to feel your absence instead of taking your presence for granted. This video breaks down how and why silence works in female psychology and how it affects women on emotional, subconscious, and behavioral levels. We'll explore 7 key reactions women have to a man's silence, why it makes them more introspective, and how to use it not as a weapon, but as a natural form of emotional self-control. Done correctly, silence speaks louder than any words ever could. 1. Silence breaks her comfort zone. When a man goes silent, especially after a period of attention or consistency, it disrupts a woman's emotional rhythm. Most women grow accustomed to a man's presence, his responses, and his energy. That steady engagement becomes part of her emotional routine. The moment he becomes quiet, she feels an internal shift, like something is suddenly missing. Silence creates space that words cannot fill, and in that space, she starts questioning herself. Did I say something wrong? Is he losing interest? Has he moved on? These questions feed into her emotional curiosity, and curiosity fuels attraction. What once felt predictable suddenly becomes uncertain, and uncertainty creates tension. Women are emotional observers. They notice patterns, and when those patterns change without explanation, it pulls their attention in. Silence removes the reassurance they once relied on and forces them to reflect. She begins thinking about things she never considered when your presence was constant. How your attention made her feel, how your words carried stability, and how your consistency anchored her emotions. When that disappears, she realizes the value she previously took for granted. Psychologically, silence is an interruption of control. When a woman feels she had emotional influence over you, your silence challenges that perception. It communicates that you are self-contained, not dependent on her reactions, and confident enough to step back. This creates emotional contrast, the difference between the man who constantly seeks validation and the one who knows his worth without explanation. That contrast is what makes silence powerful. Your silence also triggers introspection. Instead of you explaining or clarifying, she is left alone with her thoughts. That silence echoes louder than any argument could. It doesn't push her away, it pulls her into her own emotional space. She starts remembering moments, words, and gestures that she previously brushed aside. Silence forces memory, and memory fuels emotional connection. The absence of your words becomes the reminder of your presence. Most men believe silence means weakness or lack of confidence, but the truth is, silence requires emotional control. It means you're not reacting impulsively, not seeking to prove anything, and not trying to win attention through noise. That kind of stillness communicates self-respect. It says, I don't need to explain my value. You'll feel it in my absence. And that's exactly what happens. Silence breaks her comfort zone because it removes emotional certainty. It makes her sit with her own thoughts instead of yours. It forces her to think about your worth, your energy, and the difference you made in her emotional world. That's when missing you begins. Not because you said something, but because you didn't. Silence creates the emotional space where appreciation starts to grow. 2. Silence makes her reflect on her behavior. When a man chooses silence instead of reaction, it naturally makes a woman reflect on how she treated him. Words often create defense. People argue, justify, or dismiss. But silence removes that outlet. It becomes a mirror. She can't argue with silence. She can only sit with it. And in that stillness, her mind starts replaying events. She begins to think about the conversations, her tone, her decisions, and how she may have taken your presence for granted. This reflection is not forced. It happens organically because silence triggers discomfort, and discomfort leads to awareness. When you stop explaining yourself, she starts questioning herself. That is the psychological shift that happens when a man stops chasing validation. Silence removes noise and forces accountability. A woman might not admit it outwardly, but internally, she begins analyzing the way she spoke, the way she acted, and whether she contributed to the emotional distance. That's why silence is so powerful. It activates self-awareness in her, something no argument could achieve. Female psychology is sensitive to emotional contrast. When you are present, available, and expressive, she may have felt in control. But once that disappears, her mind starts comparing the before and after. The warmth she once received becomes memory, and that memory gains emotional weight. She starts recalling the way your attention made her feel secure, the way your energy grounded her, and the calm you brought into her world. Now, the silence amplifies those emotions, making her realize what she's lost in your absence. The key here is control. Your silence is not about withdrawal out of anger. It's about emotional maturity. When you remain calm and detached instead of reacting or chasing, it communicates strength. It shows you're not emotionally dependent on her acknowledgement. This self-restraint makes a powerful impression because it contrasts with what most men do when faced with emotional tension. They talk, argue, or plead. By staying silent, you stand out. You become the man who doesn't need to prove his worth through words. Silence gives her time to process emotions on her own timeline. You're no longer filling the space with explanations or reassurance, which means she has no distraction from her own thoughts. The mind naturally gravitates toward what's missing, and silence amplifies absence. As the days pass, she begins to feel the weight of your withdrawal, not because of what you said, but because of what you no longer offer. That realization often stirs guilt, curiosity, and eventually, longing. Silence also subtly rebalances the dynamic. It places emotional responsibility back on her side. When she senses that you won't engage in emotional chaos, she begins to adjust. She realizes that if she wants connection, it has to come from her side now. This change repositions you as the grounded one, the man with self-respect and control. In that silence, she begins seeing you differently. Not as the man she could easily access, but as the man whose attention is earned, valued, and rare. Your silence becomes the unspoken lesson. Without accusation, it teaches her the cost of taking you for granted. Without confrontation, it shows her the depth of your strength. And without noise, it communicates everything she needs to understand. When a woman starts reflecting on her own behavior because of your silence, that's when she truly begins to miss you and respect you. 3. Silence reverses the power dynamic. When a man goes silent, he unknowingly flips the emotional balance. In most interactions, especially when emotions run high, the person who reacts first loses ground. Reaction gives away power because it shows emotional dependence. Silence, on the other hand, communicates control. It's the ability to remain composed even when emotion tempts you to speak. For a woman, this shift is deeply felt. When she's used to your attention, your responses, your explanations, and suddenly you withdraw into calm quietness, the power dynamic changes immediately. You stop being the one who's chasing connection, and she becomes the one trying to understand, to interpret, to figure you out. Silence confuses her emotional expectations. She expects words. She expects some form of emotional feedback to measure your feelings. When she doesn't get it, her mind becomes restless. This restlessness is psychological tension, and tension creates attraction. She begins checking her phone more often, replaying conversations, reading your last messages again, looking for clues in your tone or timing. She becomes more emotionally invested, not because of what you did, but because you didn't react. That absence of response becomes the spark of renewed curiosity. Women are intuitive, and they rely heavily on emotional feedback to navigate connection. Silence removes that compass. When you no longer provide emotional direction, she begins losing control over the narrative. Her imagination takes over, and imagination is powerful. It fills in the gaps with emotion, memory, and even regret. The longer you remain silent, the more her mind amplifies the impact. What was once taken for granted becomes something rare, and what was once predictable becomes intriguing. This reversal doesn't make you cold or distant, it makes you grounded. A man who doesn't need to speak to be understood radiates confidence. He shows that his peace is not negotiable, that his energy will not be wasted on proving points. Women pick up on this subtle authority. It's not arrogance, it's quiet strength. The kind of composure that makes her remember why she was drawn to you in the first place. In modern relationships, where everyone is used to constant communication, silence stands out. It disrupts patterns and restores balance. It shifts the emotional labor from you to her. You are no longer the one trying to fix, explain, or maintain. You're simply being centered, calm, and unavailable for unnecessary drama. That's when she starts to realize how much control you truly have over your emotions, and by extension, how much influence that control has over her emotions. As the power dynamic reverses, respect grows. She no longer sees you as reactive, but as selective. Your silence becomes the proof that you don't need to force connection. You can walk away from noise and stay comfortable in your own space. That independence pulls her in. It makes her wonder what you're thinking, how you're feeling, and whether she's still in your thoughts. That curiosity turns into attraction, and that attraction becomes emotional pursuit. Ultimately, silence is not a game. It's composure. It teaches her that you're not someone who operates from impulse. It shows that your validation comes from within, not from her attention. And when a woman senses that kind of internal power, she starts missing your presence, your stability, and your control. Silence doesn't just reverse the power dynamic, it reminds her who truly holds it. 4. Silence makes her feel your absence. When a man who once filled her days with attention, calls, and energy goes quiet, a woman begins to feel his absence in a way that words could never express. This isn't about ignoring her or trying to create pain. It's about the psychological weight of missing something familiar. Human beings adapt to patterns, and when that pattern disappears, the mind starts to crave it. A woman who was used to your good morning messages, your humor, or your calm reassurance will begin to notice the empty space where you once existed. That silence becomes louder with each passing day, reminding her of your presence by its very absence. Emotionally, women process attachment through attention and energy. When that flow stops, their minds go into reflection. They begin replaying moments, imagining your tone, your words, your gestures. She might check your social media, wonder where you are, or even feel a strange emotional ache that she can't fully explain. That's the emotional echo your silence creates. It's not what you said, it's what you no longer give that creates the effect. She begins realizing that your energy, once constant, carried more meaning than she admitted. The feeling of your absence often arrives slowly. At first, she might feel relief or pride, thinking your silence means nothing to her. But time changes that perception. When other distractions fade and no one else gives her that same feeling of security or focus, she begins to feel your absence as loss. Silence has a way of amplifying memory. Every conversation, laugh, or emotional connection becomes more vivid in her mind. What was once ordinary now feels rare because it no longer exists. Psychologically, absence works like scarcity. The less she hears from you, the more valuable you become. This happens because silence allows her emotions to grow in the background without interference. When you're not chasing, defending, or explaining, her emotions have space to breathe. They expand in your absence, and that's when realization hits. She misses the man who was always there. She begins associating that quiet space with the emotional balance you brought into her life. Your silence also creates contrast. In a world full of noise, constant messages, and meaningless communication, your lack of response stands out. It shows self-control, discipline, and focus. It tells her you're not seeking validation. And that calm detachment makes her wonder who you're giving your attention to now, what you're focusing on, and why you're not trying to get hers anymore. That uncertainty keeps her emotionally engaged, even without you saying a single word. This stage of missing you isn't about ego, it's about emotional realization. She starts connecting how much calmer, safer, or more centered she felt around you. That awareness builds appreciation. And once that appreciation forms, longing follows naturally. She doesn't miss you because you tried to make her miss you. She misses you because silence forced her to feel what life is like without your presence. When a man learns to let silence do the talking, he allows time to work in his favor. It's not coldness, it's emotional strategy. You don't have to cut her off. You simply stop giving what's no longer appreciated. And that quiet space becomes the lesson. In that stillness, she begins to recognize the energy, stability, and peace that only you brought. That's when she truly starts to feel your absence, not as emptiness, but as deep regret for losing what she never valued enough. 5. Silence makes her chase. Clarity. When a man goes silent, something powerful happens inside a woman's mind. She starts chasing clarity. Women value emotional understanding and closure, and when that disappears, their thoughts spiral into questions. Your silence becomes a puzzle she feels compelled to solve. She wants to know what you're thinking, why you pulled back, and what your silence means. Every unanswered question feeds curiosity, and that curiosity creates emotional attachment. The more she thinks about your reasons, the deeper she invests mentally and emotionally, often without realizing it. Silence denies her certainty. Certainty is emotional comfort. It allows her to feel secure and in control. When that comfort vanishes, the human mind naturally tries to restore balance. She replays moments, texts, and conversations, trying to decode signals you may have never intentionally sent. Even if she appears detached on the surface, her inner world is active. That's the power of your quietness. It engages her imagination, and imagination is more powerful than words because it fills in gaps with emotion, not logic. When you stop explaining, she starts assuming, and assumptions are almost always emotional. She wonders if she said something wrong, if you lost interest, or if another woman has your attention now. These thoughts create tension, and that tension becomes emotional pull. In relationships, The person who creates emotional tension without losing composure usually holds the psychological advantage. By remaining calm and silent, you allow her to chase the answers instead of you chasing validation. The beauty of silence is that it reverses emotional pressure. When you talk too much trying to fix or explain, she listens less and feels less. When you say nothing, she starts to feel more and think more. That's when her pride and ego begin to wrestle with her emotions. She may try to convince herself she doesn't care, but silence forces the truth to surface. The truth is, your absence speaks to her in ways words never could. She begins to feel the imbalance between how much you once gave and how little she reciprocated. Women are deeply emotional communicators. They read between the lines, sense emotional shifts, and interpret silence as meaning. That's why it's so powerful. It gives her space to feel, to wonder, and to reach out. She might send a casual message, test the waters, or bring up something random just to see if you'll respond. It's not always about the message itself. It's her subconscious way of trying to break the silence and restore emotional balance. That moment, when she reaches out, is when the dynamic has fully shifted. You've stopped chasing, and now she's pursuing emotional clarity. This process happens because silence highlights value. When you were always available, she could predict your reactions. But now, she can't. That unpredictability creates fascination. It makes her think about you during moments of quiet, at night, or when she sees something that reminds her of you. Her emotions begin connecting your silence with depth, mystery, and composure, qualities she may not have appreciated before. The more she seeks clarity, the more emotionally invested she becomes. And that's the power of a man's silence when it comes from strength, not anger. It pulls her in without a word. It shows emotional discipline, patience, and confidence, all traits women respect and are drawn to. Silence becomes the invisible magnet that draws her back, not because you chased her, but because she needs the emotional peace your presence once gave her. That's how silence makes her chase clarity, and through that chase, she rediscovers your value. 6. Silence builds. Respect a woman can't truly respect a man who cannot control his emotions. When a man reacts impulsively, arguing, begging, over-explaining, he shows that his emotions control him. But when he chooses silence, he communicates strength. He shows that his peace comes first and that he values his energy more than proving a point. That composure doesn't go unnoticed. Women may not say it aloud, but they deeply respect a man who knows when to speak and when to stay silent. Silence builds respect because it demonstrates mastery over emotion, ego, and reaction. In female psychology, respect and attraction are closely linked. A woman may like a man for his looks or charm, but she respects him for his discipline, consistency, and control. When she sees that she can't provoke him into losing composure, her perception of him changes. Your silence sends a clear message. It tells her that you don't operate from emotional neediness. You're calm under pressure. You're not trying to convince or compete. You're not looking for her approval. You are simply choosing peace over drama. That level of self-control earns respect faster than any words could. The more you remain silent in situations where most men would react, the more she begins to see your depth. It's easy to be calm when things are easy, but when tension rises and you stay composed, that's when your silence speaks powerfully. It communicates that you're in charge of yourself. Women instinctively find that attractive because it creates safety. A man who doesn't crumble under emotion is a man she can trust. Your silence becomes proof of emotional maturity, and emotional maturity is rare. There's also something mysterious about silence. It forces her to wonder what's going through your mind. It makes her respect you more because you're not predictable, Predictable men are easy to read and easy to manipulate. Silent men, on the other hand, are harder to decode. They stand out. They make people adjust their tone, their energy, and their behavior when they're around. Silence creates a quiet authority that demands respect without ever asking for it. Your silence also protects your dignity. Every time you choose not to engage in petty arguments, not to over-explain yourself, and not to chase after validation, you reinforce your self-worth. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate and what you ignore. Silence communicates that you're not available for disrespect. You don't need to announce your boundaries. They're felt in your quiet withdrawal. That's what women notice most. The moment you stop reacting, you start commanding respect. Over time, silence changes her internal dialogue about you. Instead of thinking of you as someone emotionally dependent, she begins to see you as disciplined, patient, and strong. She starts speaking differently, approaching you more carefully, valuing your time and attention more sincerely. Why? Because your silence has shown her that your energy is not free. It's earned. Respect is the natural result of that realization. Ultimately, silence builds respect because it sets you apart. In a world full of noise, impulsive reactions, and emotional chaos, your calmness becomes magnetic. You don't chase validation. You let people rise to your level. That quiet strength doesn't need explanation. It's felt. And once a woman feels that, she cannot forget it. Your silence becomes the foundation of how she perceives you, a man of control, focus, and emotional power. Respect follows naturally, and once respect is built, attraction and longing grow with it. 7. When silence makes her miss you. When a man withdraws and goes silent, something powerful happens inside a woman's mind. She starts to feel a void, an absence she didn't expect to feel. At first, she might try to ignore it, convincing herself that she doesn't care. But silence has a strange way of amplifying emotions. It forces reflection. It makes her replay moments in her mind, asking herself questions she never considered before. Did I push him away? Was he really that calm, or was he just done? That uncertainty begins to eat at her slowly. Silence makes her miss you, not because you're gone, but because it reminds her of how different your presence felt compared to the noise of everyone else. Women are emotional by nature. They connect through communication, attention, and energy. So when that energy disappears, it triggers discomfort. Your silence becomes the mirror that shows her what she took for granted. Every time she checks her phone and sees no message from you, every time she posts something and notices your name isn't there, her mind starts to spiral. That's when she begins to miss you, not just as a person, but as a feeling. You represented stability, calmness, and control, and now that energy is missing from her world. When you go silent after being consistent, she feels that contrast deeply. The human brain is wired to notice what changes. If you were once available, engaged, and attentive, your absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. Silence forces her to confront her own behavior. It makes her realize that your attention wasn't guaranteed. It was a privilege. And once that privilege is gone, she starts craving it. She might start remembering the small things you did, the tone of your voice, the way you stayed composed when others couldn't. Your silence starts living rent-free in her thoughts because it speaks of detachment, and detachment is the ultimate form of power. The more you remain silent, the more she begins to associate that silence with the loss of emotional security. She'll start testing you indirectly, liking your posts, reaching out subtly, or creating situations that could get your attention. It's not always conscious, but it's her way of checking if she still matters to you. Your silence makes her miss you because it triggers her emotional curiosity. She wants to know what you're thinking, if you've moved on, if someone else has your attention now. That curiosity turns into emotional tension, and that tension transforms into longing. But silence works best when it's genuine, not manipulative. You can't fake peace. You must actually be at peace. The goal is not to use silence as a trick, but to use it as space to rebuild your energy and focus on your life. When your silence comes from self-respect and not resentment, its effect is far more powerful. She'll sense it. Women are intuitive. They can feel the difference between a man who's pretending to be detached and a man who truly is. That's why silence only makes her miss you when it's real. It's not about pretending not to care. It's about truly not chasing what's no longer serving you. When you stay silent and continue to grow, live, and move with purpose, she starts to see you differently. While she's busy wondering about you, you're out improving yourself, focusing on what matters. That shift in energy makes her realize that you were never waiting. You were evolving. And that realization hits harder than anything you could say. Silence becomes a reflection of strength, not distance. It's not cold, it's powerful. It creates mystery, respect, and emotional pull. In time, silence transforms into the very thing that makes her crave your presence again. It turns your absence into a statement of value. It teaches her that you were never desperate for her attention. You were just giving it because you wanted to, not because you had to. That's when she truly starts to miss you. Not because you said something to make her feel that way, but because you didn't say anything at all. Silence is not weakness. It's discipline, control, and emotional intelligence wrapped into one. In a world where everyone reacts instantly, your ability to stay calm and quiet makes you stand out. It's not about punishing her. It's about protecting your peace. When a woman realizes that your silence isn't a reaction but a standard, she begins to understand your value on a deeper level. Your silence teaches her what words never could. That access to your time, energy, and emotion is earned, not owed. A woman remembers the man who didn't lose control when everything around him begged for a reaction. She remembers the calm tone, the quiet confidence, and the composure that made her feel both curious and safe. Silence doesn't just make her miss you, it teaches her what she had. And the moment she feels that difference, her perception of you changes forever. But here's the truth. Silence is not a waiting game. It's a growth phase. It's when you redirect the energy you once gave away into yourself. It's when you rise, rebuild, and refocus on your mission. That's when silence becomes louder than any argument, stronger than any words, and more unforgettable than any confession. When you master silence, you master your emotions. And when you master your emotions, you control the connection. Let your silence speak for you. Let it echo your worth. Because in the end, a man who doesn't need to speak to be understood is the man no woman ever forgets.